coming to this hearing of the Senate half. We like to think the better half of the PUE. That's biased. Good to see you all. Welcome back from your August. If this is your first visit to the State House since then, we're very pleased to see you. Why don't we begin with hearing testimony on H755, if there is any testimony. Actually, I'm sorry, I apologize. We may have Senator Comerford with us, but I don't think so, because I just saw her upstairs. So she's signed up to testify, but is not here. The second person signed up to testify is Steve Linsky with Climate Action Now. Is Stephen with us, perhaps remotely?
I am.
Hello, Stephen. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. I didn't know I was going to be leading off. My goodness.
Well, you have a starring role. Make the most of it.
Well, I don't know. I submitted testimony, which I hope you have.
Yes,
and as you can see, I'm a resident of East Hampton, and I sit on the Climate Action Now's Legislative Committee. And on behalf of CAN, I offer this testimony in support of 755 and 2091, which is, as you mentioned, sponsored by Senator Comerford on the Senate side and Representative Blade, Dome, Lewis, Scarsdale, and Sabadosa on the House side. We're all extremely proud, of course, that so many come from our neck of the woods. Judging from the bills that we looked at, and this particular bill was deemed to be a high priority bill by our organization, it appeared that there was broad acknowledgement that to meet the state's climate goals, we need to further update the operation and oversight of our energy utilities. And just as the legislature previously recognized the need to decouple production and distribution functions of utilities, and just as last session, we achieved greater transparency in modernizing the electrical grid. This bill, 755 and 2091, takes the next necessary step by shifting the role of energy system planning from the investor-owned utilities to unconflicted experts, whose expertise extends beyond particular utility boundaries. I should point out that my own utility sits both in gas and electric. And by decoupling these roles, critically important energy system planning would no longer remain subject to those potential conflicting interests, and thereby would enable the state to better achieve its climate goals without that impediment. We ask you quite sincerely to vote favorably out on this bill, 755 and 2091, and it would be very appreciated, Mr. Chair, if the committee would see fit to do so.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Linsky. I appreciate your testifying. I do have a question, but first I want to, and I neglected to invite any legislators who are with us remotely to testify. So right after we hear from you, I'll see if there are any House or Senate members that wish to be heard on this bill or another one. I do want to make a comment, and you can take it as a question. The interesting issue raised by this legislation is who should plan our electric power infrastructure, distribution, and transmission. As you know, there is a Siting and Permitting Commission focused both on generation and transmission that Rebecca Tepper, Secretary of Energy, announced in April. The membership of the Commission on Siting and Permitting hasn't been announced yet, but is expected this fall. Isn't this the kind of difficult issue that we should hope to hear something useful from such a commission about, rather than our moving ahead and legislating either Representative Roy bill, which would create a permitting and energy czar empowered to waive every single state environmental law we've passed in the last 60 years, or this bill, which would move the jurisdiction over to the executive branch. It seems to me that this is the kind of issue that really needs to be talked out very thoughtfully and with a number of people. What do you think?
Well, I think that you're absolutely correct in the reference that you made to the upcoming, commission. But I would point out that that's down the road a little bit. By the time you get to the citing and licensing portion, the planning is upside. To create, the kind of facilities and infrastructure that down the road, of course, we get further permitting and further review. The planning function is so critically important, and it's wholly inconsistent, at least in my view, to advance the state's climate goals, at the same time putting the planning into the hands of those who have interests in existing industries. Again, I pointed out mine, both not only the electrical but also gas, and expect that what would come out of their planning would wholly advance climate goals. Climate goals, let's put it this way: investor-owned utilities are to make a profit. They externalize costs. The planning would internalize those, and that's what's the critical difference.
Thank you. In the 2022 Drive Act, we created, we mandated the submittal of grid modernization plans, these days called electric sector modernization plans. Those plans, the first drafts of them pursuant to the September 2023 deadline that we set, have been submitted now to the executive branch, to the DPU. So we have a planning process. Starting over with this planning process seems to be a recipe for undue delay myself, but that's not a question. I appreciate as just an observation, which is that we have a planning process in which both a grid mod advisory council consisting of advocates like yourself and other folks have a role. Then the DPU has a role in reviewing. And by the way, the DPU under the statute that we wrote can not only recommend modifications to these utility-generated grid modernization plans, but can reject them and return them for more work. So I think we got the planning process addressed, although the larger issue you raised, which is whether the utilities have too much power in that process and the public interest too little, is something that I hope the Siting and Permitting Commission will address as well. But we want to thank you very much for testifying today. It's much appreciated.
Thank you, Senator. And I agree with you. I made reference in the testimony about what happened last session, which was greatly appreciated. This steps beyond just the grid to energy at large, beyond specific industries. So that's why it's important.
Good point. Good to hear from you as well.
Thank you.
We've got Johanna Sepke of CLF. How are you? Good to see you again.
Good to see you. Thank you very much. Well, for the record, I'm Johanna Sepke. I am a staff attorney at Conservation Law Foundation, testifying today in support of an act relative to electric grid, climate resilience, and microgrids, S2100, H3159. I will start by observing that Hurricane Lee passed us by out to sea, but we have been hit hard before and we will get hit hard again. And when it comes to intense storms, as climate change intensifies and our seas warm, we are just going to see more intense and more frequent storms. And the effect on the electric grid is becoming a critical issue. The cost of restoration of storms is beginning to skyrocket as storms become more intense. Just to give some context, I don't want to get too into the weeds, but I'll give some figures. Eversource and National Grid each annually contribute $30 million and $16 million respectively to a storm fund, which is meant to be sort of the average cost of restoration per year. Both of those funds are currently overdrawn by more than $100 million. So they are not keeping up with the cost of storm recovery. The shocking figure, though, is that for 3 storms in a 12-month period between 2021 and 2022, Eversource is currently seeking recovery of over $440 million. That's nearly 15 times the annual expected cost. I raise these numbers just to illuminate how out of touch the grid is, or how out of touch these companies are in terms of the expected storm intensity. These companies have no requirement currently to assess the vulnerability of their systems or to plan for climate change proactively. And so this bill would require a filing with the DPU by the end of 2024 and every 5 years thereafter, a vulnerability assessment and a resilience plan for their systems. The key components are a clear mandate to do this kind of planning and enforcement hooks allowing the DPU to deny storm cost recovery if the companies aren't adhering to their resilience plans. The other component of this bill is the softening of a statutory impediment to the installation of microgrids. As you know, the investor-owned utilities have exclusive distribution rights, the franchise clause, and community microgrids are currently impeded because the companies have the right to deny the interconnection of those microgrids. So I respectfully request that the committee vote this bill out favorably, and we will be filing written testimony with more details, and happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you very much. So just to help us out here, there are currently no requirements the DPU imposes on the utilities to plan for a resilient system?
So they currently have emergency response plans requirements, which are responsive. They are not proactive. They do not contemplate climate change. They are only plans for what happens in an emergency. They do not look at the growing scale, magnitude, intensity of expected emergencies and intense storms. There is discussion as part of the previously referenced grid mod process where the companies have effectively volunteered to do this kind of planning, but without a state mandate or enforceability measures, there's just too great a risk that they will do it insufficiently or on too long of a timeline. And so it is one of those urgent things that the state needs to do. I think the DPU has the authority to require this stuff. CLF filed a petition requesting the DPU initiate rulemaking on this over 2 years ago and again earlier this year, and we have not yet seen any activity on those petitions.
Well, I must say you raise an interesting issue here, and I thank you for doing that. However, I totally don't get, really, the inclusion of the microgrid thing at the end. I know it's tangentially related, but that's somebody in your working group must have made a last-minute ask to have you plug that in. So the rest of it hangs together and is useful. This is a little bit of a stretch.
Sure. Well, microgrids are one of those key technologies in making a grid more resilient, and especially when it comes to those communities that have frequent outages and late restoration of power, low-income communities, communities of color. A community microgrid would give them the kind of resilience that a planning process would be slow to do.
Yeah, no question. But there are other ways of dealing with an emergency too. It seems arbitrary to see it pop up here. But I want to thank you for the rest of the bill, which I think is very interesting. I'm interested in hearing more from you and from others as to whether there's anything in place right now, because that would be you may have identified a major gap in our entire regulation of the electric power system, and for that matter, perhaps the gas system, if there's nothing in place right now. So thank you for flagging that, but let us know if it turns out there's something else in place already so that we can figure out how to reconcile whatever exists and what you propose.
Thank you. Yeah, I do believe it is a gap, and happy to continue the conversation.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Silas Bauer, on-site renewables. Silas perhaps is right there. I was going to situate you in the Bahamas or someplace,
That would
reaching
be
us
nice.
remotely, but of course we're happy to have you in person.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Barrett and members of the committee, for the opportunity to testify today in support of H3992, an act to expand customer access to a modern grid. My name is Silas Bauer, and I'm here to speak on behalf of Onsite Renewables, a Massachusetts-based company that has over 700 megawatts of commercial and industrial battery storage projects in the interconnection queue. Onsite's batteries are designed to be installed behind the electric meters of businesses and to serve electric demand of these businesses during peak load events. There are several critical roadblocks that hinder the integration of energy storage projects in Massachusetts. Interconnection is the most significant. Project developers file interconnection applications with the utility, which conducts a study to determine whether the project might cause safety or reliability issues on the local electric grid. The study results determine the system upgrades needed to interconnect the project and the developer's share of that cost. High interconnection costs are causing battery storage projects to not be financially feasible. Over the past 4 years, interconnection costs have risen by as much as 300%. And the timeline to complete the utility studies has increased from 3 months to at least 18 months. It's Onsite's view that interconnection cost increases are due to how the projects are studied by the utility rather than the actual potential impacts of the projects on the grid. It's apparent to Onsite that battery storage is not well understood by the utilities. The Commonwealth storage and climate goals are likely to be missed if the legislature doesn't take steps to correct this process. Onsite filed interconnection applications for over 105 megawatt battery projects with an assumption of $750,000 of interconnection costs for each project. Preliminary assessments from the utilities have estimated an actual interconnection cost of just under $5 million per project.
So could you give us those two figures again?
We assumed $750,000 of interconnection costs for each 5 megawatt battery.
Where's that assumption contained?
That is contained just in our internal models.
Okay.
And it's based off of historic processes.
$750,000.
$750,000, which is actually kind of a high,
Yeah, okay.
Historically speaking, that's high.
Okay, and what, by contrast?
$5 million per project.
Okay.
Is
And what role does the 5 million play in delaying things or justifying delays?
Part of it is the types of upgrades that are being required. And so in many cases, we're seeing substation transformer upgrades as part of the upgrades or full substations. And when you have a substation upgrade, you're talking about a 4 to 6 year upgrade before the project can go online. And so it's, the study timelines are a wholly different issue, which is based on the group study process, which was part of the interconnection tariff and started in 2021 as a new portion of the interconnection tariff, and it's just drawn out the time frames. And in addition to that, we have transmission studies with ISO New England, which are called affected system operator studies, which also take about 18 months. So in truth, for our projects, we filed most of these applications in 2021 and 2022. We're about 2 years into most of our studies, and we still have another 2 to 2.5 years to go before they're out of the studies.
Thank you. Are you all set? I have a question, but have you completed your testimony?
I have a few more things if I have time.
Sure, mention them, yeah.
Sure, absolutely, thank you. The most astounding example is Onsite's 5 megawatt project in Seekonk, Mass., which is sharing the cost of a new substation with a 1.5 megawatt PV and battery project. Onsite's estimated share of the $15 million substation upgrade is $11.5 million for one project. The bill before the committee would help address many of the interconnection issues facing battery storage projects. Among those, requiring that no customer shall be denied the right to interconnect an energy storage facility, specifying time limits for both the initial interconnection application process and for the utilities interconnection design and construction process, requiring utilities to allow developers to self-construct interconnection upgrades, and establishing a permanent office of an ombudsperson with the power to recommend civil penalties when appropriate. So we hope this important piece of legislation is reported out to the committee with a favorable recommendation, and thank you for your time.
Well, thank you for submitting the bill and for the testimony. What about the other half of the conversation? That the electric companies presumably will step forward and indicate that the grid at many nodes is at capacity, and that they need to be able to modernize distribution and transmission before they can interconnect a lot of additional facilities. What would you say to that objection on their part?
For solar projects, we always look at, or the utilities always look at the grid for the hosting capacity. When you have batteries, you also have to look at the load on the system and the ability to charge the battery. So it's taking energy off of the system. If you're modeling how that demand is, how it is used over time, or how the battery is charging over time, we are proposing that we're going to charge the batteries at night when the load is lowest. But we're being asked to take on a schedule that will not change, that assumes that the batteries will charge from 11 p.m. to 3 p.m. every day of the year. And that's modeled. And it's modeled that the batteries are charging at their full capacity of 5 megawatts for that 18-hour stretch. If you think about that, 8 a.m. to 3 p.m., which is part of that charging time, are during some of the peak hours of the day, particularly in the summer. So the charging at 5 megawatts, which is not what we plan to do, will interfere with times when the system is at peak load. And when nobody should be charging, we should be looking for ways to take load off of the system. That's what our batteries do. So we charge at night, but we're being told.
Yeah, sure. So this particular bill doesn't apply only to batteries.
Correct.
It applies to all distributed generation. Mm-hmm. And again, the electric companies are going to say that there are significant problems with the capacity at the grid, especially with respect to distributed energy resources, and that the grid will need to be strengthened before interconnections can be permitted. So I guess there's a sequencing question. Do you create your right to interconnect before you fix the grid, or do you fix the grid and then green light the right to connect?
The way we see it is that our batteries are fixing the grid.
But we're not just talking about batteries.
I understand, but the idea is that the batteries can take the power generated by solar.
I know that's the idea.
Yeah.
But that's a separate question. We don't know whether the proposed battery projects statewide are enough to, are you suggesting that we don't have to make the grid more robust because your batteries will solve the issue of a grid resilient enough to handle
I'm not.
new distributed energy projects?
I'm suggesting that we are moving in the right direction with grid modernization. The batteries can help.
No question the batteries can help,
Yeah.
but that's, wasn't the question I asked, which is whether we should permit you to interconnect before we ascertain that the grid is, in general, resilient enough both to accept energy from your projects and, of course, also distribute them to EVs and to heat pumps. In any event, we don't have to go back and forth. You're sticking to your talking points, and I can appreciate that.
Right. Can I add one last thing?
Sure.
What our batteries are supposed to do is less putting energy onto the grid and more taking energy off of the grid by
Yeah,
being
yeah.
a demand response
I
resource.
have an additional question, but at first I want to introduce Senator Mark. We're very pleased to have him join us. As I understand this bill, the amounts that would be charged to the developer of storage or the developer of solar or distributed energy are capped, and all the excess charge, whatever it might be, would be recovered through the company's rate base. Am I understanding that correctly? Are there caps here for you but not for the public?
For the size batteries that we have, the caps don't apply to us. We're going to file written testimony as well, and we have suggestions for a cap that could apply to projects of that size. But if you notice, they limit the caps, I think, to 250 kilowatts, perhaps?
No, let's see. No, the caps begin at 60.
At 60, but up to 250, I
Sure,
believe.
up to
Yeah.
up to 500, but
Or 500, thank you. Yeah.
so these can include. I'm just asking a question in the form of a comment. It looks as if we would cap the cost for developers and have the public pay for whatever the remaining costs are through the rate base. That seems like it's a significant reallocation of risk.
It is. We are in favor of that portion of the bill. The costs to interconnect a 500 kilowatt system of any type are much lower than what we're looking at for our projects.
Okay. You know, the other, actually, I'm sorry, I do want to correct my statement. Actually, you have a separate cap for projects whose export capacity does not exceed 60 kilowatts.
Mm-hmm.
So we're getting to a cap for projects both large and small with the allocation of all the additional cost onto the rate base.
Correct.
Okay. Do you know who wrote the bill? I'm always interested. Always interested in which of my fellow lawyers has taken pen to paper. Who wrote this particular bill?
I don't know.
Really wrote it, not who sponsored it and threw it in the hopper. Who wrote it?
I'm not aware. I don't know.
When you find out, let me know.
Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate
Thank you.
it.
Appreciate it.
Sherry Morgan, Elders Climate Action. Maybe Sherry is with us remotely. Maybe Sherry's not with us remotely. Well, we'll look forward perhaps to hearing from Sherry later. Is Dave Dayton here? How are you, David?
I'm well, thank you. I appreciate being here. I've submitted some testimony in writing
Yeah, thank you.
in favor of the bill. It's a complex business, so I won't try to go through all the details. The second part of the bill is the most challenging part, because what it does is to suggest that in certain limited cases, it should be possible to connect buildings that are separately metered in order to share solar energy and battery storage to increase their resilience. The other purpose of microgrids, as you know, is if we can remove a large part of the electric load from the grid during peak hours, it reduces congestion and reduces the need to build additional peaking plants. So those are the purposes of a microgrid.
I noticed. I
You're
noticed
familiar
that's
with
in
that,
here. Yeah.
right? So utilities, in fact, do support a number of microgrids in campuses and along congested neighborhoods, military bases, and so forth. So the bill does not, we don't require new legislation to do that. When we've built microgrids, we've always done it in cooperation with the utility, and Eversource has been cooperative in Chelsea and Chinatown.
Cooperative or uncooperative?
Cooperative.
Oh, okay.
Because of the particular design that we chose, which is a wireless design and does not challenge any utility franchise laws. This bill, on its face, in the last paragraph, appears perhaps to challenge those franchise laws. And I'm here to say there's a way to avoid that and to work with the utilities to get this additional capability established. And if I can be technical for just a minute, it's to make sure all the wiring between buildings is behind the meter and behind transfer switches, so that in fact buildings are connected only when there's an emergency and the grid is not functioning, or during peak hours when the utility wants to remove extra load from the grid demand. In those cases, the transfer switch would take the loads from each participating building and move them from the grid to a local source.
Dave, can you point out the language that pertains to this issue that you're now discussing? Where is it in this bill?
It's in the last two paragraphs of the bill.
Okay, yeah, that's all right, thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
The first sections of the bill, I think, are relatively uncontroversial. They require some reporting that utilities are largely doing, I think. But increasing the clarity and the imperative behind them.
Okay.
So it's the last two paragraphs that appear to be controversial. And so
I would, I'm not sure I would agree that the first 4 pages are non-controversial, but nice try. And in any event, I agree with you that Section 3 is different, almost a separate bill. May I ask you a question about Section 3?
of course,
First of all, thank you very much for testifying.
my pleasure to be
This
here.
is interesting stuff. I think we're all interested in I'm using the royal we, which I shouldn't do, but I believe the legislature is interested in microgrids. But I'm interested in the fact that you think a municipality, including, let's say, a small city or town, would have the staffing expertise to determine when electric generation or storage should and can be safely shared. That seems like a technical question.
Yeah, you're certainly right about that. So they would contract with experts to install the kind of microgrid controller that would do it automatically when it senses a grid interruption or during peak hours.
Okay, have you heard from municipalities? Which municipalities have expressed an interest in this capacity?
We're doing it in Chelsea under contract that the city has written with Amoresco. The city council approved a $4.5 million microgrid for Chelsea, which, as you know, is an environmental justice city. We're getting close in Chinatown and Boston. We have a contract with the city of Cambridge and the town of Milton to study the feasibility of the same design.
Well, that's interesting. Senator Mark, do you have any questions involving microgrids? Where are we in terms of microgrids? Do we have legislation already on the books that seek to promote them or to regulate their establishment, or would this be the first explicit specification of microgrids in state law?
No, there's pretty robust state law in support of microgrids, but of course the definition is a little elusive for most of us. And this seeks The second part of this bill seeks to extend that to a special case where there's wire behind the meters to connect buildings. Each building, especially in urban areas in EJ communities, we don't have much room to put solar on the roof. So if we could put a large solar field next to it or wherever it fits and connect buildings together that would share that solar and the batteries that were just discussed, then we would go a long way to improve the resilience in each building and be able to connect them all together as a resource.
How does this language align with the experiments going on in Lowell and Framingham with respect to network geothermal?
They're really parallel. The Framingham pilot drills, as you know, drills some geothermal wells and connects them to provide fluid to facilities and improve the efficiency of their heating and cooling systems. It's largely a thermal system. We're talking here mostly about electrical systems.
But wouldn't those systems use electric power to drive portions of the electric engine?
Yes, that's a good point. They do use electricity, and in the event of an outage, they would no longer be able to function. So resilience is essential to everybody.
I hear you. I do have a question. You might be able to help us with it after today, to make sure that what we've legislated with respect to network geothermal not only is something that can be made compatible with this, but ideally would serve it well, right? We don't want to merely align the two grudgingly or reconcile them. It would be good if this language were to serve the purposes of network geothermal, or whether perhaps we amended the network geothermal language we created in state law in 2022
It's an interesting
to advance
idea.
microgrids.
Yeah.
I would just want to make sure that we weren't creating two siloed experiments without thinking about how to integrate the two.
Right, they're entirely compatible. Audrey Schulman is a neighbor of mine, and I've been watching her project from its beginning and applaud it. I think it's, of course, limited to where it can be installed, but the idea of putting these two concepts together may be pretty sound. I don't understand legislative strategy as well as you. It sounds like it might be a good idea.
Yeah. Well, I'm mostly concerned about our possibly legislating this standalone, and then realizing that there could have been a way to reinforce the network geothermal experiment or to integrate the two, and we missed the opportunity because the language, the two sets of provisions didn't speak to one another or accommodate one another. That's all. It's just a topic for another day. I want to thank you very much. Senator Mark, do you have any additional? Thank you. Very interesting stuff.
Thank you, folks. Good luck.
Okay, we'll take a look at the really, really easy first 4 pages on another occasion, but good to.
That's a deal.
Is Senator Comerford here?
Yes, thank you. I think there are only very few people in the legislature who would say the very, very easy first pages, four first pages. Mr. Chair, I brought up my colleague from the Acadia Center,
Oh, terrific.
Ben. Thank you so much, Chair Barrett, honorable members of the committee. I am grateful to be taken out of turn, grateful to have my colleague here from the Acadia Center. I'm here to speak on S2091 and H755, which is an act reforming energy system planning for equity and climate transformation, otherwise known as the RESPECT Act. I will not sing this time, Chair Barrett, about respect, but I appreciate the acronym of this bill. So I filed this bill in partnership with Representative Natalie Blais. It's our second time working with the Acadia Center on a piece of legislation, and I'm very, very grateful that Ben Butterworth is here. He is Acadia Center Director of Climate, Energy, and Equity Analysis. As I mentioned, we've developed this bill in collaboration with the Acadia Center, which as you know, is a thought leader in proposing effective clean energy solutions for a livable climate and a stronger and more equitable economy. So that's their sweet spot. As you know very well, Chair Barrett and committee, we need a 21st century energy grid to achieve the green energy revolution that we all know is needed in order to ward off the most dangerous impacts of climate change, I'll say. I really want to begin by thanking this committee for advancing a bill we filed in partnership, Rep. Blay and I, in partnership with the Acadia Center last session. It was an act to create a grid modernization advisory council. And I'm happy to say, as you know, the bill, thanks to you, is now law, and the council is now up and running, and receiving and reviewing grid modernization proposals submitted by utilities. And our Commonwealth's electricity grid, I believe, hopefully, will be the much better for it. The RESPECT legislation that's before you we think of it as the next step toward achieving the 21st century grid that we need and deserve. So right now, as you know, there are significant conflicts of interest and inefficiencies in the way that we do grid modernization planning. Currently, as you know, utilities do the planning for electric and gas distribution systems that they own and operate. And their parameters from the DPU, also, as you know, are about things like cost savings and outages. Not as much, I would submit, a focus on climate change or equity. And I believe it was this committee that put climate change into the DPU's parameters, right, in 2022. But there's not as much of a focus. So each utility does its own grid planning, meaning that decisions are made in silos, I believe, without coordination between utilities. I think we could agree that this is incredibly inefficient. So utilities are prioritizing the grid investments that work best for them, not that work best for the Commonwealth's people. I don't believe their fault. You know, they have a financial interest in the outcome of their planning decisions. But we have an interest on the part of the state's grid. So allowing the utilities to lead system planning leads to overspending, I believe, and increased pollution. And a grid that doesn't really prioritize equity or environmental justice the way it could, and certainly isn't taking the whole Commonwealth's energy needs into account. So the RESPECT bill, and Ben will talk more about this, offers a new framework. Energy system planning should be done by state officials at this precipice moment with meaningful public and stakeholder input, not by the utilities. So under the bill, a new Department of Energy Transformation Planning would be set up within the EEA line, and this office will develop and implement long-term distribution system plans to move us to clean and affordable, reliable electric grid-powered energy and distribution system. The office will oversee a transparent long-term planning process that will be conducted in the best interest of ratepayers and our greenhouse gas reduction goals. So it really centers both in this equity framework. So building on the progress that you helped drive last session, I respectfully urge your strong consideration and favorable advancement of this bill, S2091 and H755. Thank you so much for your consideration. And if it's okay with the chair, we'll ask Ben to speak, and then we'll take your questions.
All right. Thank you, Chair Barrett and honorable members of the committee. My name is Ben Butterworth, and I'm Director of Climate, Energy, and Equity Analysis at Acadia Center. Acadia Center is a nonprofit research and advocacy organization that works to advance bold, effective, and equitable clean energy solutions. The organization has a long history of advocacy for creating a fully integrated, flexible, and low-carbon energy grid. Addressing these issues will help the Commonwealth advance a future of lower ratepayer costs, more local jobs, fewer greenhouse gas emissions, and better public health. I'm here today in support of H755 S2091, an act reforming energy system planning for equity and climate transformation, or RESPECT, filed by Representative Blay and Senator Comerford, respectfully. RESPECT proposes a modernized framework for how utilities make investment decisions to ensure that investments in our energy systems are aligned with state goals to address climate pollution, further environmental justice, and lower consumer costs. Respect reforms are needed because utility planning today faces three key problems. Number one, utility planning is siloed between electric and gas utilities, which causes overspending, reduces reliability and resilience, and more climate pollution. Number two, current planning processes ignore equity and environmental justice. And number three, utilities have a financial interest in the outcome of their planning decisions, creating significant conflicts of interest. Respect proposes a new framework for how the electric grid and gas network should be planned that will help ensure our energy systems help meet state goals to reduce climate pollution, further environmental justice, and lower consumer costs. States should conduct all-in independent energy system planning that incorporates meaningful stakeholder input, including voices that have been ignored to date. Comprehensive planning should consider supply and demand side resources, as well as climate requirements and environmental justice impacts. States should create neutral, statewide planning entities that are designed to look for solutions beyond utility boundaries and across fuels, leaving traditional utilities free to focus their efforts on business development in alignment with climate and equity mandates. H755 S2091, an act reforming energy system planning for equity and climate transportation. This accomplishes these goals through this legislation, creates a new Department of Energy Transformation Planning under the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. This legislation would task this new department with developing and implementing long-term distribution system plans to assist in the transition to a clean, affordable, reliable electric grid and restructured natural gas distribution system in a cost-effective manner. They would also conduct this long-term planning while ensuring a transparent process, which will help ensure that planning is done in the best interest of ratepayers and the Commonwealth's greenhouse gas reduction goals. It is clear that our current approach simply is not working, and additional resources, programs, and ideas are necessary for economy-wide decarbonization. Thank you for this opportunity to share Acadia Center's views on this bill addressed above and under consideration in today's hearing, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you both. Senator Mark, do you have any questions? I want to thank you guys very much for coming today with this interesting bill. And what I'm about to say isn't meant to be puckish or directed toward members of the House in any way. I'm just trying to frame a point. Siting and permitting, essentially accelerating the build-out of the grid, is perhaps the biggest priority in climate before us in this two-year session. Everyone is talking at the federal level and the state level about the need to build bigger, better, and faster, particularly faster. And nobody knows quite how to do this, seems to me. But there is a bill, H3215, submitted by Chair Roy, so it carries with it a lot of stature, that would create a czar. And the czar would take pleas from state and local agencies, but hold the unilateral power to waive all state laws if the czar decides to do so, and all local laws as well. And the idea of this draconian approach, and I think the House Chair would concede that it's draconian, the basis is that we got to do everything yesterday. The grid is at the breaking point. It can't absorb any more distributed energy, especially large industrial scale projects, nor can it easily deliver the additional energy that the charging of electric vehicles or heat pumps will require. So the idea is to go double time, and the only way that at first blush that you can go double time is to sweep all existing law aside, potentially on a project by project basis. Breathtaking, but also easy to understand. You can see why it might save time. God knows at what expense. You can see why it might save time. This bill would seem to take time. I mean, you're proposing an entirely new process, not to accelerate the process, but actually to reinvent it for conflict of interest reasons that you articulate very well. But it seems to me that there is no way to reorganize this particular locomotive while it's chugging down the track. And so we're supposed to see it chug faster, but completely rebuild it from the ground up by the terms of this bill. That seems mind-blowing also in its own way. Consider that a question.
No, it's a good question. Do you want to go first, or shall I?
Go for it.
Okay. I love that you're thinking about speed. I do. As you know, and we've talked about this, Mr. Chair, Western Mass communities are completely thwarted right now, and I know Senator Mark knows about this. People want to put solar on the roofs. They're told, well, okay, great, and you can pay $15,000 because we don't have a grid that can support you. Communities like Wendell got really close to community solar, and then the utility company said, well, it'll be about $3.5 million so that we can take your energy, essentially. So I totally see the urgency and the time boundness, and clearly the climate crisis is upon us. There's no mistaking that. I guess I would say we can't afford not to get a better handle on the utility grid modernization planning process. And that, yes, I do believe to slot in another line in the EEA, wonderful, triumvirate, will take time, but the return on that investment will be a cohesive plan that's not profit-driven, that is cohesive in such a way that National Grid will know what it's doing and where it's doing it, and Eversource will know what it's doing. They won't duplicate. They'll have to abide by the Commonwealth's energy goals, emission goals, and we will then have the kind of oversight necessary. Right now, as you know, we don't have the oversight necessary to engage in grid modernization in an effective way. I wrote down the Chair Roy's bill, and certainly I've heard about the bill. I would be worried about the opportunity costs of that, right? The costs in that opportunity if we throw everything out, and be able to subvert laws or regulations in order to do grid modernization, although I agree that it's tempting because the urgency is so good, so great. But I don't know another way, other than what's offered in this bill, to really actually get the kind of traction, planning, strategic development, accountability, non-duplication, non-profit-driven work out of the utilities that we need them to do. So hopefully it would return in the end.
Yeah, I mean, couldn't have said it better myself. I think looking for ways to expedite siting and rethinking the way that we do long-term distribution system planning are complementary. And I would echo the point that I think, yes, I think the short-term kind of investment in more time in the creation of a new department, I think it would pay dividends in the long run. We're going to be investing a lot of money in the energy system transition and making sure that we're doing it correctly and as efficiently as possible, and minimizing conflicts of interest, I think is paramount in making sure that we kind of stay on that cost-effective trajectory to decarbonization in the Commonwealth.
Does CLF have its own analysis of which state and local statutes are the most obstructive or cause the most delay in terms of electric power or natural gas infrastructure? Let's stick with electric power for the moment. Do you have your own theories about why these damn projects take so long?
That's not my area of expertise within the organization, so I'd defer to my colleagues, but we'd be happy to connect with your office on those issues.
Can I just make one more point to your really good question? And thank you, Ben. If it wasn't this administration, I might be more worried about what you had said, Mr. Chair, in terms of how much, like the labyrinth of inaction and slowness. But I do think the governor and lieutenant governor and their secretariat, the EEA secretariat, plus the climate chief, have demonstrated that they are on it. They are hiring some of the best minds. They just testified and spoke to the solar forum that we're doing in Western Massachusetts. They are
Congratulations for your work on that forum.
Many people, and the Clean Energy Extension is really the leader here. But They are sharp. They are talking to each other. The lines of communication are great. All of their testimony was complimentary. They have a plan. They're firing fast and I think quite skilled. And so I would have, perhaps if it was not this administration, if we don't seize this moment to reform grid modernization in this comprehensive way, I might have more worries. But with the Healy-Driscoll administration dedicated to climate as it is, and with the people they have in power right now and in office, I think that they could do it while continuing to further the plan to reduce emissions.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you that I too look forward to working with the administration with high hopes. I can tell you, though, about a conversation I had with the Commissioner of DOER in the Baker years, who I respected. I differed with him on a significant number of issues, but respected him. I always found him to be a straight shooter. And we were talking about the review of grid modernization projects, and he was saying, you know, how many staff the utilities have to plan grid projects? Lots, he said. And do you know how many electrical engineers I employ in my department to review their plans? And this was now 1.5 years ago. And I said, no, I do not know how many electrical engineers. He said, well, you need electrical engineers to really dig down into the bowels of these studies around capacity. And he said, I have one. I have one engineer who's come to work for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the Department of Energy Resources, to enable me to review proposals that come in from the executive branch. How many, how many do you imagine I would have to hire, he said, if we were to play a larger role? And I don't see, Senator Convert, I don't see the hiring process having improved even with this exemplary new governor.
You're totally right. You're totally right, which is, I think, why this bill is actually super interesting as a proposal. Because under this EEA, this department would set the parameters, and they would be able to not necessarily do all the planning, but tell the utilities what kinds of plans, how they are, what areas to pick up, where to focus, what to prioritize. They would be able to offer this sort of this tighter parameter bucket, if you will. I'm sure that's a terrible phrase, but you understand. So it's not like they're doing the planning for the utilities. Eversource is still going to go ahead and do its plan, but it'll be cohesive. It will be non-duplicative. It will have to factor in the state's climate energy goals. And then, here's the cool thing, then the Grid Modernization Advisory Council gets to catch it, right? And say, okay, look, this new department, it set these parameters. Did Eversource do what it was supposed to do? And Mr. Chair, if we didn't make that clear enough in the bill,
I don't think you did.
Okay. Okay, and your expert reading is really important,
Yeah.
but it's trying to find the right balance between the state doing all of the Grid Modernization Advisory Council work, all the planning, and engaging utilities within some instructive bucket.
Okay. Well, that's an interesting concept, Senator.
And
This particular draft, though, anticipates the executive branch actually playing the.
Doing the
Well, I'm just quoting from Section 3. The department shall advance the Commonwealth's public interest by conducting statewide long-term distribution system planning. Conducting is more than promulgating guidelines.
We should look at that language, for sure. I mean, I don't know, Ben, do you have any thought about that?
Yeah, I would just say that the bill kind of outlines that, studying costs of what it would take a department like this to staff up on the level of expertise that would be necessary to conduct this type of rigorous planning, that cost study's called for in the bill. This planning is currently part of the current rate base, right? So the utilities are able to hire these experts through rate-based dollars, right? And so this bill, it would likely end up shifting some of that spending from electric rates to state spending.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Listen, here's what I want to thank both of you, because where we agree, and I'm just speaking for myself now, I can't speak for other members of the committee or for the Senate, but where we agree is that there's something distressing about the current system. And again, I'm being pretty forthright. I'm not trying to be petty or to pick a fight, but when we wrote that grid mod planning requirement in 2022, it wasn't necessarily in the expectation that the results would carry with them enormous consequences. Certainly, it was not anticipated that everything in a grid mod plan would be financed by the ratepayers more or less automatically. The Roy bill, H 3215, more or less gives a green light to everything that was included in the grid mod plans that were received last week. That's breathtaking. For one thing, and there are many problems with accelerating everything you find in a plan, the grid mod plan requirement never mentions the term project. But the Roy bill declares that every project included in the plan effectively should be deemed automatically approved and put on a very tight timeline toward final construction. So if a plan suddenly is greenlighting a whole bunch of discrete projects and permitting a czar to waive every state law in the land in the process to get that project built, yeah, I'm not sure our grid modernization language at first blush intended those downstream consequences. So I am very concerned about Jeff's approach. But, well, I should say, and so that's where we agree that there's something, if grid mod planning is essentially going to be the first domino that causes ultimately every project to be green-lighted, then clearly the public interest should have been present at the formation of those plans much more strongly than it is. You've got an advisory committee, a grid modernization advisory committee with no binding power. You've got a DPU that only gets a look at the very end of the process after months and even years may have been put into bringing the process along, right? So that's not, there isn't a strong enough presence of the public interest
Upstream
to justify the grid mod plans being greased. So I agree with you guys that there's something wrong with the status quo, but I think this integrating an entirely new exercise would delay things too much, because you don't even address permitting and siting. You kind of move upstream of that, create altogether new processes. All the downstream obstacles would remain. The totality of it would be too long. So I think we're all, this committee included, we're all still groping for the right way to get things done fast, but responsibly, and to make sure that cost apportionment is fair. So I want to thank you, because you guys in this bill have raised the critical issue, which is whether the current process works and should have all the downstream consequences that new ideas and new bills might have for them. Yeah. So I look forward to hearing from you all and to continuing to think about this.
I really appreciate it, and thanks for raising the time-bound urgency. We can go back and talk about that and how we could maybe respond to that.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Comfort. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're very grateful.
Good to meet you earlier today. I know we shook hands there. Lydia Churchill.
Hi there.
How are you?
Great. How are you?
Good, good, good. We're just having a great time here.
I am too. Thank you.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Chairman Barrett and members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me to testify today. I am Lydia Churchill. I'm the new Clean Energy Campaign Associate with Environment Massachusetts.
Oh, great.
If you're not familiar with us, we are a statewide environmental advocacy organization working to protect clean air, clean water, and a livable climate. I'm here today in support of the GREEN Act, House Bill 3171, Senate Bill 2109, an act establishing the Gateway Cities Renewable, Efficient, and Electrified Neighborhoods Initiative. As we know, we are in the midst of a major climate crisis. This summer, we witnessed heat waves, deadly wildfires, and just last week, massive flooding in Leominster and North Attleboro. It is abundantly clear we need to transition away from fossil fuels, which contribute to climate change, harm our health, and increase the frequency and severity of extreme weather. Massachusetts is also home to many houses and apartments in gateway cities that are centuries old. They are energy inefficient and are, as a consequence, harmful to the people who live in them and to the broader community. Most of these homes burn oil or gas for heating, and residents, particularly low and moderate income families, may lack the opportunity to switch to cleaner alternatives. According to the 2050 Massachusetts Roadmap Report, over 80% of the buildings that will exist in 2050 have already been built, which means a massive piece of the puzzle to transitioning off of fossil fuels is retrofitting existing buildings to be more energy efficient, fossil fuel free, and powered with renewable electricity. The Green Act will establish the Green Initiative, a program to retrofit low and moderate income housing in gateway cities and in smaller communities with similar demographics, because these communities have a vital role to play in the statewide transition to 100% renewable energy. This program will retrofit housing in these communities to be highly efficient, use clean heating and cooking technologies, and where possible be powered with energy from rooftop solar panels. The initiative also brings together residents, building owners, community organizations, and municipal and state officials to create solutions for energy efficient, pollution-free homes. We all know we need to transition to clean energy, and we need every community to be a part of this transition. This bill will support residents in gateway cities in meeting our climate goals. I hope you will report favorably on this bill.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Senator Mark, do you have any questions?
It's not a question, it's actually, well, it is a question. But it's not a question to your testimony. As I'm reading through the bill, gateway cities, which I represent one, and then I represent others that are too small, how did you or whoever come up with the smaller qualifying language? Like, where did that come from?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer,
Sorry.
so I can inquire and get back to you on that.
Yeah, I love that concept for other bills as well. So, thank you.
Yeah.
You know, well, I'll ask the question I ask of all those who write these longer, interesting bills. Do you know who the individual, there's always one person who is the primary author. Do you happen to know who it is?
I also do not know the answer to that question, but I also can get back to you on that.
Okay. I noticed that that there's no, at the moment in this draft, there's no integration with Mass Save. We have asked Mass Save to focus on low-income neighborhoods, many of which, as you know, are in gateway cities. So I'm concerned about what the deficiencies in the Mass Save program are that would trigger the need for a separate program. It goes without saying that more money is better than less money, but we could appropriate more money to Mass Save and command it to focus even more than we have on low-income neighborhoods. So what argues for creating an entirely separate track devoted to the same issue?
That's a very good question. I think I agree with your statement about more money is better than less. And I am not sure of the intention behind the bill writer specifically with regards to why we need a separate bill focused on this, but my understanding of this is it just needs to be prioritized, and that having a bill specifically focusing on low and moderate income housing in gateway cities would just be an important pathway to speed up the transition to clean energy or speed up our transition off of fossil fuels.
Thank you. I want to make a respectful note of Senator Marks' point. It is good to see smaller municipalities included. And otherwise, gateway cities would be included.
Mm-hmm.
You should take a look at the definition of gateway cities, because I think it excludes the city of Boston. And it may exclude, I'm not sure, the cities of Cambridge and Somerville. So gateway cities are an important concept. To some degree, though, they were created in order to direct attention away from the cities that get all the attention or have all the money, Cambridge. So using it as the only qualifying term here would inadvertently exclude some of our major metropolitan areas, and I just want to mention that. But I want to thank you very much for coming and testifying. Interesting idea. The struggle I have with this particular approach, and it's been embodied in a couple of other proposals, is that the path of least resistance to focus on low-income people is to enlarge Mass Save, if only because it's in place. Now, that's not to say that the governance of Mass Save shouldn't be revisited. I've got a bill to reorganize Mass Save. But since it exists, and since there's a fundraising mechanism in terms of the energy efficiency charge on your electric bill and charges hidden in rate cases for gas utilities that result in collections of monies for Mass Save there, since the funding mechanism is there, the focus on low income is there, and it's a successful program compared to those in other states, it seems like a very inefficient thing to do to create a siloed project that addresses exactly, for the most part, the same issues. And that's what worries me about them. But that's just food for thought.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you allowing me to testify. And I've noted down your thoughts, so I will be mulling over those.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Carrie Catan. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good.
So, my name is Carrie Catan. I'm speaking on behalf of Green Energy Consumers Alliance, a nonprofit organization based in Boston with a mission to harness the power of energy consumers to speed the transition to a low carbon future. I'm here to express our support for S2091 and H755, an act reforming energy system planning for equity and climate transformation. We support this bill because our current utility-driven planning system creates incentives for utilities to present plans to the DPU, DOER, and DEP that further the interests of their shareholders rather than the public. The public interest comes in many forms: affordability, safety, emissions, and supply. We now know that to reach our climate targets, electrification and grid modernization are key components that must be developed with consumers and the environment in mind. Furthermore, in our experience, leaving planning to several utilities leads to a hodgepodge of ideas and investments. It also makes the review of several utility-driven plans more difficult for state agencies and the general public. While we have investor-owned utilities remain involved in the delivery of electricity and gas service, those utilities should be given the opportunity to respond to a publicly driven process. This can help ensure that we avoid issues that we've seen in recent years where utilities have pursued their own self-interest, even when that comes at the expense of the public interest, such as the gas system line to Douglas and their promotion of RNG and hydrogen as building decarbonization strategies. While we definitely are creating an ever better system of retroactively keeping the utilities in line, I think this bill makes sure that we are not constantly playing on the defensive, that it's not just the utilities getting to decide where the lines are drawn and what we're fighting over. It's really those appointed by elected officials who are in the driver's seat. And while this will, to answer some of the questions you brought up, take some time to set up, we didn't shut down every road in Boston while we were doing the big dig. I think we can chew our gum and walk as well. And I think in the long term, this investment in state capacity will make sure that plans, in the 2030s and the 2040s, where we're still going to have to be making significant investments, will be better for the work and time we're putting in today.
Well, you make a good point. Any questions, Senator Mark? I don't have any, my other remarks stand, but I appreciate your commenting on them.
Okay.
Thank you.
you.
Cece Doucette. Hi.
Hi, thank
you
you.
for appearing before the committee.
Thank you for having me. My name is Cece Doucette, and I am the Director of Massachusetts for Safe Technology. And Chair Barrett, I want to thank you because back in 2020, you approved this bill for a no-fee opt-out on utility smart meters, so we're very grateful. Senator Sear and Senator Mark, thank you for introducing related bills to investigate wireless radiation and to protect our children from radiation in schools. You may recall that Vermont already has a no-fee opt-out, so it can be done. It's critical we pass Senator Moore's 2152 with urgency for 3 reasons. 1, the Industry and Federal Communications Commission misled us into thinking that wireless smart meters are safe. They are not. The FCC has now been sued for ignoring 11,000 pages of scientific evidence of harm. But it's been 2 years and they have not responded to the court order to bring public radiation exposure limits in line with the science. So we must address safety at the state and local level. 2, I have a packet for each of you that includes this graphic of the biological harm that we have documented in the scientific literature. It explains wireless radiation's role in causing so many children and adults to suffer today from insomnia, anxiety, depression, headaches, cognitive impairment, behavior issues, heart problems, and more. 3, New Hampshire springboarded off of our wonderful Massachusetts bills, and in 7 months, they passed a law to investigate wireless radiation. They produced this first-in-the-nation commission report in which they document the conflicts of interest with the wireless industry, the FCC, and the FDA, and they align it to the Big Tobacco Playbook. New Hampshire recommends transitioning away from wireless for primary connectivity and instead investing in fiber optics to and through the premises. Not only is hardwiring safer, but it is far greener, faster, more reliable, private, and secure than anything wireless can ever provide. Reinventing wires is a good roadmap for us. We know that wireless harm is hard to get our minds around. Like COVID, it's invisible, but we can measure this electropollution in this chamber with a radio frequency detection meter, and you see we are in the high and the extreme levels just with the wireless radiation in here. I have measured my home with 2 electric meters on it. It pulses this radiation 17,000 times a day at my family. Senator Moore has put an emergency preamble on this bill to opt out now from the existing toxic utility meters, and please pass 2152 with urgency and amend House 3220 which is relative to advanced metering infrastructure, to require Eversource, National Grid, and the others to produce hardwired meters with no radiation transmitters. Chattanooga, Tennessee has already done it. Thank you. I'd be honored to answer any questions.
Well, thank you very much. And you're right to note that several years ago, the Senate did approve this legislation of Senator Moore's, and I thank you for your advocacy then. I want to reiterate that I support no fee opt-out, which doesn't mean I agree with your analysis of the health harm, but I respect an individual right to opt out of advanced metering. I don't think that's a threat to those of us who might choose to go forward. I'm reserving judgment on other provisions in the legislation, including the prohibitions directed at utilities. I'd need to think about those, but I want to restate my support for the core idea, and I very much appreciate your coming back to us today.
Sure. Would you like a copy of the New Hampshire report? Because it really impacts your committee.
Sure. I will assign Senator Mark to a reading of that, and he can pass it on to me after he summarizes it for me.
They give me $100 a year.
Right. No, I love that recommendation
That's
because
after you read my wife's thesis.
as we know, Senator Mark was a former lineman, so he understands the biological effects of these man-made energies if not handled carefully.
All right. Well, thank you so much. All kidding aside, we appreciate your coming. Michael Muadin. Michael may be with us remotely.
Yes, I am. Can you
Hi,
hear
Michael.
me okay? Hi, Chair Barrett. Thank
Yes,
you so
coming
much
through,
for having
coming
me
through
today.
loud and clear.
Okay. Honorable legislators, my name is Michael Muadin. As president of the Alliance for Microwave Radiation Accountability, I've encountered many of the millions of people across the United States who've been disabled by severe chronic electromagnetic sensitivity, a sickness studied and documented for 70 years as classic microwave radiation syndrome. I'm here to support Senate Bill 2152, which protects human health by granting people who are sickened and disabled by microwave radiation the right to opt out of a smart meter and the right to choose an analog meter. This bill protects public health because any additional exposure to radiation devastates those with microwave syndrome and the EMS disabled. Further irradiation crashes their immune system, devastates their mental health, destroys the rest of their physical health, and finally ends their lives. The victims grow old, fast, and die. That's why the military called microwave radiation sickness rapid aging syndrome when it was first detected in radar operators decades ago. In other states, people with microwave syndrome and the EMS disabled lack the protection provided by a smart meter opt-out combined with the right to an analog meter. Those in Virginia who must refuse a smart meter due to radiation sickness and disability have had their power cut off by the local utility and have been left without electricity, even in the winter. The energy bill of the United Kingdom was just rushed through the House of Commons with only 9 dissenting votes. It is in the final stage of passage before royal assent. Buried deep inside the 446 pages of dense legalese is a provision which allows representatives of energy companies to bring police protection and use, quote, reasonable force to enter any home or premises to install a smart meter. The utility companies of the UK are being given a license to kill the victims of microwave syndrome and the EMS disabled. It must not happen here. Honorable legislators, it takes a certain fearlessness to turn the tide of events and shape the course of human history.
Michael, we've reached the end of the 3 minutes.
So thank you. Protect human health and lead the world by your example. thank you for your time and kind attention today.
Thank you, Michael, for testifying and for being with us today. John Chronin. Hi, John, by the way, that's a 3-minute timer, and we impose it on everyone.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is John Chronin. I'm a resident of the Commonwealth, living with my family in Fairhaven. I want to thank you in advance, express my gratitude for your support and vote to pass a bill of utmost importance, specifically S2152, an act relative to smart meters. Bill S2152 provides utility ratepayers the choice to obtain utility metering equipment that gives them protection from unwanted wireless microwave radiation exposures and surveillance technology from mandatory smart meters. This bill is desperately needed in order to allow residents and utility customers a means to ensure the protection and preservation of the health, safety, and privacy of themselves and their families. Consumer choice of non-radiation emitting utility meters, known as opt-outs, are already found in place and in practice across the country. Vital and mounting information on the current blind spots in society regarding the detrimental effects of microwave radiation that smart meters emit can be found at massforsafetech.org. I believe it is especially crucial to have this law to protect children who are shown to have greater vulnerability to exposures from the bombardment of round-the-clock pulsed microwave frequencies from 4 smart meters in their own homes. Please also support this bill to afford protections in law for consumers against the real situations identified therein, where residents are currently being coerced to install smart meters by threats like water shutoff, costly legal action, and punitive fees and fines from municipalities without their informed consent, simply to access basic necessities like water, electricity, and gas. I have personal experience of the tremendous stress and pain living under these threats cause, as they have been leveled against me and my family by my town's water department and BPW. As of last week, a new extortive $100 per month punitive fine for non-compliance. It seems to me Massachusetts residents are often misled when mandated to install undisclosed two-way radio frequency antennas emitting unknown, unwanted radiation all day, every day, year-round, capable of monitoring private activities related to the utility on their properties and homes, without ever being told what devices they were actually receiving other than AMR or reading device or the like. Pertinent and specific questions asked of my municipal leaders regarding the equipment, its capabilities, and the scope of this AMR project have been ignored. Again, I ask for and would be grateful for you to please vote for this just and humane cause and ensure the passage of Senate Bill S2152 to give the Commonwealth's utility consumers the freedom of choice to assess their own risks, practice precautions, and make the appropriate choices to protect themselves and their families from unwanted, constant microwave radiation exposures based on their reasoned and considered beliefs. Your grateful constituents will be happy to hear you confirm your support of them by voting and passing Senate Bill S2152 into law. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And I want to repeat, John, that I'm supportive of the core idea of permitting a no-fee, no-consequences opt-out from so-called smart meters. So I thank you very much for testifying and for reinforcing that thought on my part. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming in, by the way. It's good to see you. Tobie Simmons. How are you?
I'm doing very well, and I'm happy to be here today before you, and I'm so grateful for your support. My name is Tobie Simmons, and I'm here in support of Bill S2152. I'm a certified medical coder and medical transcriptionist, and I'm well aware of the evidence of biological harm from microwave radiation exposure. My family has gone to great lengths at our own expense to keep our property and our children protected from the harmful effects of wireless radiation and electronic surveillance. We use safely wired telephones, devices, and internet connections at home, and since 2017, we have been homeschooling our children to keep them safe, far away from the compulsory radiation exposure that is required of students all over Massachusetts, because sadly, using experimental Wi-Fi on children in captivity at school is considered cheaper than using safe wired connections for their technology. It's tough finding places to learn, work, play, or do anything in public without being exposed to wireless radiation these days, and for citizens who want to limit exposure, our homes have become the only safe havens where we can take control and provide healthy spaces for our loved ones to retreat and recover from unwanted daily exposures. In Fairhaven, Mass, since 2022, the Water Department and BPW have been terrorizing my family for refusing a smart meter system, menacing us with threats to shut off our water, to take legal action and drain us financially, and then they announced plans to forcibly connect hazardous wireless equipment to our property against our will and to make us pay an undisclosed sum for a costly construction project with an RF meter pit hidden under our sidewalk but on town property, right where our children play. They voted to do this to us, even after we clearly expressed that we do not consent. Now, after subjecting hundreds of town residents who did not readily comply with the smart meter mandate to months of coercion and threats of water shutoff, even in freezing February when it could destroy our pipes, the BPW has suddenly changed course and voted instead to fine my family and the 100 other remaining households in Fairhaven who have still not complied with the tyrannical mandate an arbitrary $100 per month non-compliance fee with the specified purpose of herding us into submission. They see our punishment as an excellent source of revenue for the town, so they've agreed there will be no time limit as long as we pay up every month. It seems their preferred solution is to extort residents into acquiescence. Why won't they just offer us a fair opt-out plan, when clearly they are able to get readings on an ongoing basis without using any wireless? The power given to a town's BPW is meant to serve residents, not to abuse them, by erratically inventing punitive fines which clearly do not adhere to traditional rate-making principles of cost causation, and not to discriminate against a minority of Massachusetts residents for practicing our firmly held beliefs by gouging and oppressing us while we beg for mercy. Many residents who got the new readers installed were not aware of the undisclosed wireless equipment involved, and now they're angry they were misled into giving consent without being informed, and they want to have the new equipment removed. Radiation without representation is tyranny. Massachusetts citizens need relief from the merciless tactics of utilities making up the rules as they go, and the best way you can protect us is by passing Bill S2152 into law. Thank you so much for hearing me.
Well, thank you, Tobie, and I will mention again what I said to John. I appreciate your coming and your passionate advocacy here. I don't think we need to require every single last person to sign on to a new technology, and so I support right of choice in this case. I'm pro-choice.
Thank you so much for being so humane and for hearing us.
Thank you very much.
For your support throughout. Much appreciated.
Helen Walker. Maybe Helen's with us remotely. Mana Washio.
Yes, can you see me and
Yes.
hear me okay?
Well, I can hear
Okay.
you loud and clear, Mana. I'm not sure we can see you. Maybe we can. Depends on is that you? Hi, there you go. Good to see you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. My name is, can I start? Can I start?
Yeah, by all means.
Okay, all right. My name is Mana Washio, and I live in Barrington, New Hampshire. I lived in Massachusetts and Rhode Island before moving to New Hampshire. I became EHS, electrohypersensitive, in 2013 when my husband and I lived in Watertown, Massachusetts. While we were on vacation, NSTAR at the time came and installed a bank of infamous smart meters. Our bedroom was surrounded by them, and there were also 2 circuit breaker panels underneath our bedroom because we lived on the first floor. We also had a Wi-Fi router in our bedroom without knowing its harm. Immediately after the smart meter installation, I started having piercing headaches as if someone was inserting an ice pick into my brain. It was so bad. I could not sleep at all. I also developed all sorts of GI issues, heart palpitation, chest pain, concentration difficulties, and so on. My symptoms subsided when I went away from my home, and it became worse when I came home. I also felt very strong pain standing right in front of the smart meters outside, so I knew what was causing the problem. EHS diagnosis was extremely difficult to attain because there are very few doctors who could diagnose. I was only able to get one in 2022 after moving to Rhode Island. I was a performing musician for many years, but large concert venues where people gather with their cell phones became the hardest place to work. I was forced to completely switch my career, and now I work from home as a health coach and Reiki practitioner. Although I love my current job, I had to start all over and I had completely different training before I was able to start making a decent salary. In July 2023, I took the National Board exam for health and wellness coaching. 3 years ago, 2020, I actually took the same exam, but miserably failed due to the severe short-term memory issue and vision issues I developed due to the high EMF exposure at the test site. Even though I had requested, I was not given any accommodations I needed. So I forced myself to go into the test center. This year, I submitted the accommodation request again, along with the formal EHS diagnosis from MD and 2 supporting letters. I also explained what happened to me 3 years ago, but they did not give me the necessary accommodations right away. My accommodation request was only granted after I wrote the 3rd letter to them, quoting directly from the Department of Justice website under the exams and courses section for people with disability. After the approval, I was finally able to bring in a few EMF shielding materials. Thankfully, my short-term memory and vision were intact this time and I passed the exam. I hope my experience will open up the opportunity for other EHS people to take the exam with necessary accommodations. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak today.
Well, thank you, Ms. Washio, very much for taking the time to testify. Senator Mark, do you have any questions of Ms. Washio? We hear you loud and clear, and we appreciate your testifying today.
Thank you.
Ken Gartner.
Yes.
Hi,
good
Ken.
afternoon.
How are you?
I'm fine, and I'm also going to talk about 2152. So good afternoon. I am Ken Gartner of Warren, and I am a degreed electrical engineer. Today I speak in favor of Senate 2152, which at its core seeks to ensure that human rights are effectively preserved with respect to injurious utility meters. These meters and their associated infrastructure employ powerful microwaves, broadcasting thousands of times per day. Since 2011, such pulsed radiation has been recognized by the WHO to be a contributor to human cancer. Yet new infrastructure forces pervasive wireless deployment. People endure the associated health risks because utilities often are uncooperative or outright hostile when consumers request to opt out. The industry often trots out experts with impressive resumes who insist these devices pose no health risk. Their evidence is always based on the 70-year-old fib that non-thermal microwave radiation is harmless. None of the Massachusetts utilities has yet sponsored any long-term health study for any of their broadcasting meters. In effect, we are all part of an experiment right now, many of us against our will, which runs contrary to our basic human rights. National Grid offered me a hassle-free, non-broadcasting opt-out meter for $11 per month. This sounds expensive, but it does pay for a meter reader's salary and is a bargain compared with the ambulance and hospital bill for a stroke or heart attack. Well done. Eversource, in contrast, has made it clear through their corporate attorney that they will not provide an opt-out meter no matter how much evidence or how many doctor's letters are provided, or even if asked in the context of an ADA request. I know because I've communicated more than 50 times with Eversource and various regulatory and consumer protection agencies on behalf of an 83-year-old friend whose health collapse began immediately when the tech installed a new AMR meter in 2022. Eversource even conducted a single blind meter test which proved as valid my friend's contention of harm. Yet when we pleaded for reinstallation of her prior meter, Eversource insisted that it would be unsafe for them to do so. Thanks to Eversource's cold corporate calculus, she suffers unspeakable indignities and is daily tortured in her own home. This is why Senate 2152 needs to pass. Water, gas, and electric utilities cannot force people to accept novel, untested devices containing risky technology on their homes without offering an ability to opt out. To quote from Boston College social scientist Kurt Devlin, "This is a declaration of the fundamental human right of all people, simply by virtue of being human, to be free from subjection to all forms of experimentation unless they voluntarily consent to participate after being fully informed of all risks by qualified experts in all relevant fields. Further, it asserts that everyone retains the right to opt out of any experiment." Thank you for your support of Senate 2152.
Thank you, Ken, very much. Interesting quotation there at the end. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Helen Walker. Helen tried to join us earlier, may have encountered technology issues. Are you with us now, Helen? Helen, I'm going to call, I tell you what, I'm going to call Janet Fitzgerald I'm sorry, Helen, is that you? Can Helen wave her hand if it's Helen?
I think Helen is muted.
Oh, it is. Okay. Well, Janet Fitzgerald, why don't we hear from you and then from Helen? There's Helen.
I think she needs to unmute her.
Can you hear me?
Try us again. You know,
Can you hear me now?
It's lamentably squeaky.
She's logged in twice.
What's that?
She's logged in twice. That might cause the feedback.
Oh, okay. I suggest logging in once. Once is enough.
I'll call in by phone after Janet, okay? I'll call in by phone.
Oh yeah, you're okay. Commence.
Oh, fabulous. I'm testifying in support of S2152, an act relative to smart meters. I'm representing the Massachusetts Association for the Chemically Injured. Macy has been coming before this committee to advocate for smart meter choice since 2013. One reason we support this bill is that a number of our members and contacts developed debilitating ongoing health problems immediately after installation of wireless utility meters on their homes. In some cases, symptoms were so severe that people moved out of their homes. Some people became unable to tolerate a normal work environment because they developed sensitivity to ambient wireless radiation. This year brings special urgency. Under DPU Order 2180 to 82B, National Grid will begin mass deployment of AMI meters in 2024, Eversource in 2025. The opt-out must be in place before the deployment. Those ratepayers who will be surprised by sudden onset of health problems will need immediate remedy before health problems become disability. The weak opt-out offered by DPU 2069 is not enough. It is wireless, not smart, that causes the problems. The opt-out must be a non-wireless transmitting meter. In 2021, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit handed the FCC a major defeat. The agency had quietly closed its investigation into the adequacy of 1996 guidelines for wireless safety. Oral arguments showed that the FCC had no studies about wireless technologies after 1996, or about exposures from combinations of technology, or about cumulative effects over time. The court was shocked. The court found the FCC decision arbitrary and capricious in its failure to respond to thousands of pages of evidence of harm. The court reminded the guidelines to the FCC. Since the agency still has not reopened its investigation, the 1996 guidelines cannot be relied on. Consider the special hazards from large banks of wireless meters in multifamily housing. More meters mean higher emissions, sometimes above the level of those FCC guidelines. In my Cambridge condo building, below my kitchen are 18 electric meters, 16 analog, and right now 2 wireless AMR. The owner of the unit with the 18 meters is electrically sensitive. She experiences brain fog similar to long COVID around wireless meters. She recovers by staying with friends frequently. What will happen to her when that entire bank of 18 meters has become AMI meters? This is a social justice issue, since these large banks of meters are common in dense multifamily housing. Thank you for hearing my testimony. Please report S2152 out of committee favorably and soon.
Thank you very much, Helen. Senator Mark, do you have any questions of Helen? We appreciate your taking the time to testify and appreciate those citations of legal sources. Janet Fitzgerald. Hi, Janet. How are you? You're muted, Janet, at the moment.
All right, how's that, better?
Perfect.
All right. Thank you so much, Senator Barrett, Chairman Barrett. I really appreciate your time and your interest and the fact that you have really listened to the people here today and others about the effects of wireless radiation, also called RFRs. It comes from many sources, and the human body can just take so much. So several other people have mentioned the word human experiment, and that is where we're at. Never before have humans been so exposed to so much radiation as we are today. Some of us can hide. Some of us can go live somewhere else if they're lucky, which is what I have done. When I was overexposed in a condominium, that made me very sick. So I'm one of the many thousands who are what's called or diagnosed as EHS, it's one of the terms, electrohypersensitive, from just being too exposed for too long over too many years, or just my body can't take it. Many can't and just don't even realize it, but some have symptoms. Mine were like seasickness. I was incapacitated for working. So it really affected my business. And there is really a bottom line here too, because people who can't work because they get so sick, that means they're not going to be able to contribute to taxes. So I just want to bring that up because it hasn't been brought up before, but more people are going to get sick. They just don't know it yet until all of this overexposure happens. So I'm really hoping you will support SB 2152. I'm so glad you heard from the others, including the director of Massachusetts for Safe Technology, which is an excellent resource, very well organized, free webinars, and a lot of science in the tabs. So we just have to take the time to read some of that if we can. I've attended probably 100 to 200 hours of webinars, town halls, panels that included scientists, engineers, lawyers, and even politicians, because this science is real. It's different, it's independent science, by the way. It's different from some of the, quote, science that you might hear from big industry, including utility companies, because there's different interests, right? There's money interest there. It's kind of simple, follow the money. I can't go there because I have my health at stake. I have a daughter I want to stay alive for. Her dad right now is diagnosed with, sadly, a terminal stage 4 glioblastoma at the site of where he put his cell phone. And yes, the FCC is not doing their job as proven by the fact that they were sued because of this neglect. So we can't count on the FCC. And as a matter of fact, since we're in Massachusetts, we can mention the fact that Harvard did a study proving that the FCC is compromised. This is a sad state. And I can tell that you understand that, but there comes a time now where we people who are feeling not heard, and I'm not saying by you, but really federal legislation too that's being pushed through right now, we're not being heard, but big industry is. So I want to thank you very much. I can tell you are listening. I appreciate it. I know everyone who is affected, and even those who don't know yet that they will be affected once they are forced to be exposed by smart meter radiation in their homes. So thank you, and please do support this bill that gives us an opt-out so that we can live and be healthy. Such a basic bare minimum need, right? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Janet, very much. Senator Mark, any questions? Listen, we appreciate your patience in waiting a bit before testifying today as well. Thank you for doing that. That concludes our formal sign-ups. Anyone else here wish to testify who did not sign up? Hearing none, I'm going to declare this hearing closed, and I want to thank all of you for having attended.